Hello, here's a video on how to do the first quiz for Unit 1. This was about writing and solving linear equations and inequalities. So I'm just going to go through each problem and show you how you were supposed to solve it in case you were having a little bit of trouble with how I solve these problems and what the actual answers were. So first of all, for each problem, I'm going to go ahead and write my CDC ma'am because it helps keep it just a little bit organized. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my line and start with C. Now the first C stands for clearing any fractions, so I'm going to look at each one of my terms and make sure that I see no fractions. And if I do look at each one, I do see that there is a 1/10 there. That is a fraction, so I need to clear that. Now the way that you do this is you look at all the fractions that you have. So let's say that my negative 3x maybe had like a 5, and this one was like a 2. If I had a couple different fractions, I would take all the denominators and find the LCD of them. What that means is that I would write the 2's, the multiples of 2, the multiples of 5, and the multiples of 10 until I found the first number that matched up in all three of those denominators. Now, luckily, I only have one fraction here. It's just a 10, so I don't have to do all that trouble. I'm just going to multiply everything by 10. Now, when I say everything, I mean every term. So I'm going to start on the right and start multiplying those things by 10. So this thing times 10, negative 13 times 10, positive 4x times 10. On the left side, I saw some people do this 10 here, but they also multiplied this by 10 and this by 10. That is too many multiplications by 10, and it's because this 1/10, since it's in front of the parentheses, it's actually being multiplied by this thing inside the parentheses, this term. When you multiply something by parentheses, it like makes them stick together as one term. So this entire thing is one term. So just by writing the 1 times 10 in the front, I am multiplying everything on the left by 10. So that's one big term right there. So I only need to do it once on the left. Now, the way to do this is that normally you would multiply the numerators, that's the numbers on the top, and then divide it by the denominator. If I do that with the first term here, 10 times 1 is 10, divided by 10 is 1. So what happens here really is that 10 divided by 10 divides itself out because it equals 1, and I end up with just this 1 in the front. Okay, so the 10's cross out is the easy way to say that. Now on the right, I do have to multiply these terms by 10. So negative 3x times 10 is negative 30x. Negative 13 times 10 is negative 130. And positive 4x times 10 is positive 40x. Okay, so I just did step 1 where I clear any fractions and I move on to the next step. Now my next step is D for distribute, and you only do this step if you have parentheses, and we do, so we're going to go ahead and distribute this 1. Which for our problem is very easy because 1 times anything is just itself. I would recommend though, since this x does not have a number in front, I would put that 1 in the front so you know you're doing 1 times 1x. If you multiply that out, you just end up with 1 times 1 is 1x, 1 times positive 50 is positive 50. So the distribution here is rather simple because there was a 1 on the outside. And I'm just going to bring down everything else that I didn't use yet. Cross off the D step, and we're on to the third step. So I have clear fractions, distribute, then I'm on to the second C, which is combine like terms on the same side of the equal sign. So that means this line is separating my left and my right side. I'm going to look at the left side first and think if I can put these terms together. I cannot put these together because one of them has a variable and the other one does not. So they don't belong together. Over here on the right side, there are two terms that belong together. They are the negative 30x and the positive 40x. Now to put these together, you have to think of your song, same sign, add and keep, different sign, subtract. So first of all, this negative 30 is negative. The positive 40 is positive. So since these are different signs, I'm going to subtract the terms and keep the sign of the larger number. So I'm going to do 40 minus 30, just bigger minus smaller. 40 minus 30 is 10. Don't forget the x. And then since 40 is bigger and it's positive, I'm going to keep it positive. Then I'm just going to bring down my other negative 130 that I didn't do anything with yet. And I'm going to bring down everything on the left. Okay, so we're here. And we just did this step. Combine like terms. Now we are on to the M step, which is move the smaller variable term. Now you only do this if you have x on both sides, and we do. We have a positive 10x and the positive 1x. So we should pick the smaller one of those and do the opposite of it. So if I think what's smaller, 1x or 10x, it's 1x. And since the 1x is positive here, the opposite of a positive 1x would be negative 1x. So I'm going to do that on both sides. This positive 1x and negative 1x cross out because they're opposite. They make 0. And then 10x minus 1x, well, that's just 9x. Now we're here. Okay, so I'm on my last two steps. Now when I get to the A step, what I like to do is highlight it, and then go to my problem and highlight my variable. And this tells me two things. This tells me, one, that I'm looking on the right side only, because that's where my variable's at. And it tells me, since I highlighted this x here, that I'm going to completely avoid doing anything to this term. This term represents multiplication, not addition or subtraction, so we're not going to be doing anything to that term. Instead, we're going to focus our attention on this guy right here, the negative 130, and do the opposite of negative 130. Okay, so we're going to do plus 130 on both sides. Now, I saw a good number of you mess up this addition here. Make sure you use your calculator at any times that you're doubting yourself. I would just use your calculator to make sure, but 130 plus 50 is 180, positive 180. So that leads us to here. We're on our very last step now. And on the last step, all you have to do is divide by the number next to your variable, otherwise known as the coefficient. So I'm going to go ahead and divide by 9. And that should give you x is equal to 20. Okay, so I think it's very important that you do write your CDC MAM, and you have your organizer that flips open and closed to remind yourself of what these steps mean and what they look like, because I gave you examples in your flip book. Okay, so just a look at that. Now take a look at number 2. I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to write my CDC MAM. Start by drawing my line. Whoops, missed a little bit. And go through it. So step 1, clear fractions. When I give this a quick glance, I don't see any fractions here, so I can go ahead and skip that. Step 2, distribution, and that only works when you have parentheses. We do have parentheses right here, so we're going to multiply. I highly recommend that when you do distribution, you use your calculator. It's really going to help you, and it helps with the positives and negatives as well. So first I'm going to do positive 0.4 times positive 5x, and that will give you, I believe it gives you 2x, and it's positive. Then you're going to do 0.4 times negative 12. Remember, your multiplication rules state that a negative times a positive, whenever you multiply mixed signs, it gives you a negative. And this would be 4.8. Now, once you're done distributing, you're just going to bring down everything you didn't use yet. So these two terms here. And we're going to go ahead and cross off D for distribute. Now we're on to the next step, which is combine like terms on the same side. So if I look at the right side of my equals, I have the lonely 15.2. There's nothing we can do here. But if I look on the left side, I do have x terms that I can put together. Now they appear to both be positive. So if I use my nifty song, same sign, add and keep, I know I'm going to add these together and keep it positive. So in my calculator, if I do 2 plus 0.5, I get 2.5. Don't forget the x, and it's positive. Then I'm just going to bring down two terms I didn't use yet. Okay, so I just combined some terms. Next is move the smaller variable, and again, this only works if you have x on both sides. So a quick scan of my problem shows me that I do have an x term on the left, but I have no x term on the right. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this step. We don't have to do that. Now I'm to the A step, the step where you go ahead and highlight your variable. So here's my variable x on the left. And again, remember, this tells me that I'm looking on the left for any addition or subtraction, so I can do the opposite, but also avoid this term. Do not do anything with that term. Look at the other term. So I'm going to go ahead and do positive 4.8 on both sides. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring down my 2.5x and add these two together. Again, please use your calculators. I saw people do this on their own, and somehow a lot of you got 10 from adding 15.2 and 4.8, but we got to think if that makes sense. First of all, 15 plus 4 gives us 19, and then 2/10 and 8/10 make one whole, so you add one whole to that 19 and it makes 20. So just be careful when you're adding something by hand. Just think to yourself if your answer makes sense, because if you add 15 wholes and 4 wholes, you can't get 10 wholes from that. That doesn't make sense. So this gives us 20. You can do 20.0 if you want. That's the same thing. And then we're on to the very last step, which is where you divide by the number next to x, or whatever letter you have. So you divide by 2.5 on both sides, and you get x is equal to 8. That's what you should have gotten. Okay, so this problem was only a 4-step problem. We distributed combined like terms, did the opposite of adding or subtracting, and did the opposite of multiplying and dividing. So that was the 4 steps there. That's why this problem was only 4 points, because there was 4 steps. This problem, though, involved every single step, and that's why it was a 6-point problem. Okay, so if you ended up with only 4 points for this problem and you're wondering, whoa, why did I not get 6 points like the other problem? It's because it was less steps. Okay, so 4 is the max you could get here, and 6 is the max for over here. Okay, now let's move on to 3A. For this, you're going to solve it the exact same way. It's all CDC ma'am, pretty much, for this whole thing. I'm going to draw my line. Step 1 is clear fractions. We do actually have a fraction here. This term, 3x minus 12, is being divided by 6. That's a fraction. And since there's no other denominators, we're just going to deal with only that 6 and multiply both sides by 6. Now, I saw some of you do this problem and you started out great by multiplying the left side by 6, but then you forgot to multiply the right side also by 6. Now remember, these are equations and inequalities. They have to stay balanced, and that means whatever you do to the left, you should also do to the right. Okay? So these 6's cross out. Remember, they divide to make 1. And we're left with 55 times 6, which should give us 330. And we just cleared the fraction. Next, we're on to the distribute step. Remember, that's only if you have parentheses. We don't, so we skip. Next, combine like terms. If I look at the right side, 330 is lonely. Nothing we can do there. On the left side, 3x and negative 12 cannot be put together. One of them has a variable and one does not, so skip. Next, we're on to the m step. That only works if you have x on both sides. We do not, so we're going to skip. And now we're on to the a step. Again, I highlight my variable so that I know, oh, I'm going to avoid this term, but I'm also looking on the left. So I'm going to do the opposite of the negative 12. This gives me 342. And for my very last step, I divide by the number next to x. This should give you this answer. Now, some of you maybe lost half a point because you wrote x is equal to 114, but remember, this is an inequality. That symbol is not an equal sign. It is a less than or equal to symbol. So this answer means, and you didn't have to write this, but I'm showing you what it means, less than x is less than or equal to 114. So keeping this in mind, for 3b, you were supposed to prove that your answer is right. And so we're going to take what our answer means. X is less than or equal to 114. So we need a number to choose. We can choose 114 or any number less than that. So I'm going to go ahead and choose 100 because I know 100 is less than 114. So what I'm going to do is write my answer that I chose, 100, up here. Circle it. And you got a point for just at least choosing the right number. That's already a point right there. but then you needed to put it in your equation. So wherever x is at, that's where our number is going to go in parentheses. So I'm going to put 3, and instead of x, 100 in parentheses, and write the rest of the inequality. Okay, so remember parentheses means you multiply, so we're doing 3 times 100, which is 300. So now we're here. Now I'm going to go ahead and work out the numerator first, 300 minus 12, and that should give me 288, I believe. Now we're here. I know that that fraction line means division, so now I'm going to do 288 divided by 6. This is why using your calculator is so important. Nobody has time to divide that by hand. You can, but there were a lot of questions on the quiz, so I would just use a calculator since you were allowed one. That gives you 48. And then we're at the last step where we decide if this actually worked. Well, we have to think, is 48 less than or equal to 55? Yeah, it's less than it, so this is true. Okay, so you got 1 point for choosing the right number. You got 1 point for just plugging it in correctly, putting it into where x should be. And then you got another point for working this out to prove that it actually made sense at the end. Okay, so this was a 3-point problem right here in total. On the left here, since we only used steps clear the fraction, add, subtract, multiply, divide, there were only 3 steps to solve this problem, so this was a 3-point problem. This over here was another 3-point problem. And then we get to number 4. Number 4 is where a lot of you had a lot of trouble, so I'm going to try to explain this as quickly as possible, but as efficiently as possible and try to go in depth here. Okay. It says create an equation using V to represent the situation, solve to answer the question below, also define V and state what it represents. So this is what I told a lot of you to start with by telling me what V means within the problem. So let's read the problem. A website offers video game downloads for $4.75 each. Customers can also subscribe for an annual fee of $54, and then each video game will be just $2.50 each. We're supposed to write and solve an equation to find the number of video games a customer would have to download in a year for the 2 options to be equal, but we also need to say what V stands for. So I know I'm going to make my equation with V, so I'm going to start with V equals number of video games downloaded. If you wrote just that V is video games, I gave you the point, that's fine. I'm just trying to be specific here. Okay, so now I'm going to line up my 2 options because it said there were 2 options in the problem. But whoops, option 1 and option 2. Okay, for option 1, there is no annual fee, but each video game download costs $4.75 each. Now, when you hear the word each or per, that tells you you're multiplying that by your variable. Our variable's V. So here where I see $4.75 each, I know I'm going to write $4.75 V. Like that. So for option 1, we have $4.75 V. Okay, now let's look at option 2. For option 2, you have to pay an annual fee of $54 right off the bat. But each, there's each again, each download is $2.50. So I know there I'm going to be writing $2.50 V. So first I'm going to put my 54, and the word and would tell us we're adding it to that, so and is plus 250 V. So here's my 2 options side by side. I can either pay $4.75 per video game download, but I don't pay an annual fee, or I can pay an annual fee of $54 and also pay only $2.50 per video game download, okay, for each one. And they said in the problem, when are the 2 options equal? How many video games would we have to download in order for these to be equal? So since they're literally telling us the word equal, I'm going to put the equal in between them. This right here is my equation. So you got 1 point for telling me what V stood for. You got 1 point for creating the correct equation. Right here, this was the equation. There's my 2 options laid out and set equal. But you also got 2 points for solving this correctly. So now I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this thing and solve it. course, I'm going to use my CDC ma'am. I know it gets annoying to keep writing this over and over, but I'm telling you, it helps you figure out how to solve this step by step. Step 1, clear fractions, no fractions. Step 2, distribute, no parentheses. Step 3, combine like terms. We can't. There's nothing to put together. Step 4, move the smaller variable. We actually do have v on both sides. So we're going to take the smaller one, positive 250v, and do the opposite of that. And some of you didn't start with that, and I think it's because you didn't write your CDC ma'am, so you didn't know you were supposed to start with that. So we end up with 225v equals 54. Now we get to the step where we do the opposite of addition or subtraction. But if we look, there really isn't anything to do the opposite of here. We're already on the last step, so we skip that. We're on the last step where we divide by the number next to your letter. So we're going to divide by 2.25 on both sides. And those of you who used your calculators, you had no trouble dividing this. It would be a bit of trouble if you didn't use it, though. You should have gotten that v is 24. Now, the reason why this section here was 2 points was because it was a two-step problem. So in total, this entire problem was a 4-point problem. You had to tell me what v stood for. You had to tell me what the equation was. So you have to write the expressions for both options and set it equal to each other. And then you had to do the 2 steps to solve it. Okay? So just a reminder, whenever you see the word each somewhere in there, it tells you you're going to write the number next to your letter. So when it said 475 each, I wrote 475v. In the next sentence, it said each video game is 250. That's still the same thing. We have 250 together with each, so we write 250v. Anytime you see and, that you're paying a fee and you're doing downloads, that means you're going to be adding. So that's why and told us that we're going to be adding these two things together. And then at the end, you just set them equal to each other. You have the 2 options, you set it equal. I hope this helps you, and good luck with taking your retake quiz if you're doing that.